About 7 years ago, 30 of my friends, let's call them friends A, B, and C, were going to have a sleepover at A's house. We were all between the ages of 14 to 15. A lived with his grandfather. His grandma had passed away a few months before he was born and had lived a full life as a photographer, but she struggled and eventually died from breast cancer, which then took his mother about 8 years later. Father was cut out of the picture before she was diagnosed. So that particular night, his grandfather was out of town for a funeral for an old war buddy, and we had the house to ourselves. We stayed up late playing Super Smash Bros. Melee, and we all crashed at about 2 a.m. on the floor in the living room. Later that night, I woke up freezing cold, which was odd because it had been a fairly warm day, and checked the time. It was 4:30. I looked around and I saw a red blinking light on the coffee table. I make a mental note about that seeming out of place, but I was too cold, not to mention tired to get up, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning I woke up to A shaking me violently. I opened my eyes and I could tell by his face that something is wrong. I tried to ask him what's going on, but he just points at the coffee table. On the table was his grandma's last Kodak camera. He tells me that it hasn't been out of his grandma's drawer since she's been dead. He's only ever looked in there. We tried to blow it off. Maybe his grandpa was getting nostalgic because of his war buddy's death, reminded him of his wife's death, and took it out to remember or something. B and C and I were pretty confused. B, C, and I were pretty satisfied with that, though A still had some doubts. A week goes by and we all pretty much forgot about this strange morning except for A, who had been stressing out about it ever since. He decides to go to the camera's pictures developed. He calls us the next day. I can hear his voice trembling as he begs us to hurry over. When we got there, he throws down the bundle of pictures in front of us. We flipped through them, and most of what looked like some last scenic trip his grandmother took before she died. When we got to the last three pictures, I froze. B and C both gasped. The pictures were of us, all four of us captured in each picture. She sleeping on the floor in front of the television. No one else was home that night. The camera had no cell timer. I still haven't been able to explain it, and I get freaked out when I think about it. When I think back on it, even to this day. I was 10 years old, and just started 5th grade. I made a new friend in school, Janie. My parents allowed me to go for a sleepover at her house. They met her mom once. My mom and dad were pretty laid back because I was their last kid. My sisters were 9 to 13 years older than me. So my mom dropped me off, said hello to Janie's mom, and left. Me and Janie started playing karaoke when her mom decided she was going to leave. She said goodbye to us, gave us kisses on the cheek, and I remember thinking she smelled like black licorice. Me and Janie were left to do whatever we wanted for the next 5 hours. Janie's older sister came home around 1 a.m. and told us that we should go to bed because we were falling asleep on the couch. So we went into Janie's room and laid in her bed. Later that night, I can't be sure what time it was because it was pitch dark. Janie's mom came home. I woke up to a pounding sound on Janie's bedroom door. I started yelling in fear when I felt a hand over my mouth. It was Janie telling me to be quiet and pretend to be asleep. But at that moment, it was too late. Her mom had kicked the door open, stormed over to the bed, and grabbed Janie's face. She began screaming at Janie because we accidentally left the TV on. I was trying to hide under the covers, but she saw me. She began slamming her fists on the bed around me and screamed, "You think you are better than me?" over and over. I was sobbing and all I could think about was going home. I was so scared and I begged her mom to let me call my parents because I felt sick. Her mom grabbed my chin, looked into my eyes, and said, "I know what you're doing, little girl, and you aren't going anywhere until I say you can." She stormed out of the room, slamming the half-broken bedroom door behind her. Janie said nothing, and neither did I. Needless to say, I did not sleep that night. In the morning when I went to call my mom, Janie's mom was on the phone. She wouldn't let me use it, even though I asked multiple times. Finally, she was going to take a shower and I heard her pass the phone off to Janie's sister and say, "Don't let that little bitch use this phone anymore. If you do, I ain't buying you cigarettes anymore." I was a sheltered kid at the time, but when I overheard that, I knew I had to get out of there. I approached Janie's sister and she basically threw the phone at me. She was ready to give it to me before I asked for it. With a look of fear in her eyes, she said, "My mom was calling her guy, so you need to call your home now." And so I did. She saved my life, and I still believe that to this day, was her guy someone who was going to get rid of me? I shudder at the thought. The rest of the story isn't very exciting. My mom picked me up. I acted like nothing was wrong. 2 days later, it was Parents' Day in school. Janie was in my class, which meant her mom was in there. Her mom approached me and asked me why I never wanted to come over anymore and accused me of being a mean girl. She talked to me in a way that seemed harmless, therefore wasn't obvious to my mom or my teacher. I kept my mouth shut and didn't say a word. Well, until 2 weeks later. My older sister was babysitting me while our parents were at the movies, and I broke down and told her what happened because I couldn't stop thinking about it. She comforted me and told my parents. We hugged each other and cried. A couple weeks later, Janie stopped coming to school. My classmates wondered what happened, and so did I. I didn't want to ask my parents what happened. 15 years later, I heard from Janie on Facebook. There was no life-changing conversation, but we exchanged pleasantries. That's life sometimes. So crazy, alcoholic, abusive mother. Let's never, ever meet again.